Hello, welcome to this EYBA video content. I'm Paolo Picarelli, I'm member of EYBA Italy, and today I'm with Professor Alberto Vespaziani.
Hi Paolo, thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me in your office, Professor. Professor Alberto Vespaziani is Professor of Comparative Public Law at the University of Molise. He has an extensive academic experience, and you can check out his CV in the description to this video. And today we are going to talk about one of his area of interest, which is law and literature. So, Professor Vespaziani, first of all, what does the law have to do with literature?
Well, it has a lot to do. Law and literature share in lots of aspects. The first one is, of course, the linguistic aspect. They both deal with language. And I would specify that law and literature share a textual basis. So in law, we are dealing with legislative statutes, judicial opinion, we have to read a lot, we have to write. So all these elements are typical of the literary enterprise. We have to do with letters and the literary culture. So now, one way of looking at the relationship between law and literature is to look at different approaches. The first one is the so-called law in literature, which is a way of looking inside literature and finding legal elements. You don't need a legal novel, although legal novels are very popular. You can also have classic texts. So if you want to investigate how the trial works, you can look into Kafka's masterpiece. The second approach is the approach so-called of law as literature. So a way of investigating the literary aspects of the legal discourse. You can look for fictions, metaphors, you can apply hermeneutics or literary criticism, deconstructionism, to the law in order to investigate how the legal narratives are constructed, how the judicial opinions are constructed. This is the second aspect. And finally, there's a third aspect, which is the so-called law with literature, perspective that has been advanced by my beloved and passed away friend, Jose Calvo Gonzalez of the University of Malaga. He always talked about the importance of teaching law and literature together. I'll give you an example that I've incorporated in my course. When I teach American constitutionalism in American public law, I don't just teach the federal constitution of the Bill of Rights or the judicial opinion of the US Supreme Court. So we also look at literary elements. For example, the Declaration of Independence, which is not a normative document, or my beloved letters between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. If you look at the letters that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams write to each other, you understand American constitutionalism better if you look at 100 judicial opinions. So to study the law with literature is to study the literary elements that surround the life of the law. And finally, there's another aspect of doing law with literature, which is when literature kind of kicks in when the law has extended its reach. I'll give you an example. When we have amnesties after dictatorships, we had it in Italy. We also think about more recent, what happened after the end of the Brazilian dictatorship in the 80s of last century, or in South Africa. Now, all those facts that cannot be investigated by legal powers because it's prohibited by the law, well, literature can tell those stories. So, in a way, literature can fill the gaps of the areas where the law cannot reach anymore.
Okay, but, well, let's say I'm a legal practitioner, so I deal with the law all day long, and why should I spend my spare time, again, reading something which is related to the law, to my job?
This is the classical question. Now you've used a particular word here, spare time. This illustrates the dominant opinion, which is that the law is a serious profession. We are dealing with serious matters. People are fighting, money is involved, rights are involved. It's not so much fun. Judicial work has to do with power. So law is serious. Literature seems to be kind of, what you do during break. Since you had a good education and you had to read, now in your spare time, instead of hitting the gym, you can pick up a book, right? Now this is the classical and traditional view. I would like to turn this view upside down, Pier Paolo. The idea is that actually, in order to be a good lawyer, or a responsible judge, or an effective legislator, you have to engage with literature. It's precisely because you want to be a better lawyer, not because you want to have a break from the legal profession. It's because you want to read and especially write better that you need to engage with literature. If you want to be a good judge, it's not enough to know the law. You need to know society. And which better way of understanding societal values than engaging with literature? Now here we could also expand the notion of literature. We're not talking only about legal novels, of course, we're talking about the humanities. Now today people talk about law and the humanities, right? Knowing about music or knowing about theater, it's actually good for the legal profession. So again, to do law and literature, or law and the humanities, is a way of enhancing your professional qualities, of being a better lawyer, of being a better judge, of being able to write better, to argue better, and also to be more just. And I would add a final decisive existential element: to lead a life worth living. Very often, the legal world is a world of despair. How many of your colleagues say, the law, it's a tragedy, the law is so boring, I'm fed up with bureaucracy. The judicial world is a nightmare, right? Then there you have the clients and the interests and the pressure. You have this depressing world. But you can also live a legal life which is worth living, which has meaning. And which better way than resorting to the humanities to bring a sense of meaning inside the legal profession?
Well, you are quite persuasive. Well, then, could you suggest us 3 must-read books in order to be better lawyers through novels?
Yes, I can. There are also lots of texts that have made a list of legal novels, now starting from the American experience. But I would say that the sense of the enterprise of doing law and literature, again, is not going away from the law, is to take a step back in order to shed light on the law. And this holds true also for the legal tradition. So, for example, in the last year, I've started writing on Italian literature in order to understand better my own legal tradition, right? So my answer to your question would be, it depends. If you're French, I would suggest you read French literature. If you're Brazilian, I would suggest you read Brazilian literature. If you're Italian, for example, I can give you what I've been working on in the last years. One year I taught a class on the southern passion of Italy. And so we read, of course, Il Gattopardo, the leopard, and Christ stopped at Eboli. Cristo si è fermato a Eboli, where you can see a lot of discussions on the relationship between the central state and the local autonomies, why in Italy we never had a federalistic culture, right? And in order to make those discourses, it's if you take Carlo Levi's work, you learn a lot from your legal tradition. Then finally, more recently, I can recommend to read the Decameron. I've conducted a study on the legal elements on the Decameron, which is very full of legal episodes. So if you want to understand the transition between the medieval and the modern, Italian and European world, the Decameron is fantastic. And then finally, just last week, I did a conference on Dante's legal and political thought. Now, if you read not only the Monarchia, but if you read the cantos, the 6 cantos of Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso, you learn a lot on the relationship between the church and the empire. So, Christ taught at Eboli, the Decameron, and the Commedia.
Okay, and then our colleagues spread all over Europe have to look to their national literature to find the authors that represent their tradition.
Yes, I think that, for example, Balzac is fantastic, right? You, before this interview, Pier Paolo was talking about Balzac. Balzac is a gold mine, but Balzac makes you understand French culture, right? So I'm not saying that Italians should not read French literature. I'm saying that it is important to, that's why I teach comparative law, to have an open approach, not to run away from your tradition, on the contrary, than to come home. So if you're Italian, Italians, we are sitting on an immense treasury, which is a treasure made of literature, more than law. We know that law, we have to go back to the Roman Empire, maybe, yeah. But literature is really our distinctive characteristic. So I think it's important to read Balzac. You can read Kafka, you can read Shakespeare, whatever. But then it's important to confront and compare why Shakespeare is English and is not Italian, although Shakespeare was in love, as we all know, with Italy and also with Boccaccio.
Okay, well, you mentioned law and humanities,
yes.
And I know you're also passionate about theater.
Yes.
You mentioned also the theater. So, are there any theatrical plays that are related to the law? And what we said about law and literature is also true for law and theater.
Yes, I would say so. Well, the first question, of course, Shakespeare is a classic. I would strongly recommend to read Shakespeare with legal lenses. There's a widespread also literature on the law in Shakespeare. You can take Hamlet, you can take Measure for Measure, The Merchant of Venice. This year I've studied Julius Caesar. These are wonderful plays that shed light on the life of the law. Now, your second question about the relationship between law and theater, which is something I feel very strongly about. I think that there's actually a huge space to be colonized, if you wish, which is the legal profession is a profession of public speaking. And we know a lot of politicians, lawyers, judges who are actually not able to articulate language properly in the public sphere. So some theatrical education on posture, how to pause, accents, how to pronounce properly, I think that actually it would be good for the lawyers in general, the juries, the judges, the legal community in general, to be exposed to some theatrical training in order to enhance their professional skills.
Okay, thank you, Professor Vespaziani.
Thank you
for sharing with us your thoughts. I remind to all our viewers and followers that they can use the comment function to this video in order to ask questions to Professor Vespaziani and to the research committee of EYBA. I thank you again for your attention and see you soon.
Bye.